So we had all these, we were looking and we were discovering all these different plants, all these different animals, and people would just say, you know, and we begin to know the names of the plants and animals. Well, somebody by the name of Linnaeus, L-I-N-N-A-E-S, and sometimes with the U-S, depending on his Latin name, but Linnaeus came up with a classification system. Well, that's been really big for us because now in science we know the classification system, so he broke it down into a bunch of things. We didn't want to just say things are either plant or animal, okay? So as we go, you're going to see this is why people get confused. I look over here, there's a giraffe, there's a plant. They're obviously different, okay? So he came up with the different steps of the classification system. The different ones that Linnaeus came up with that we still use today are kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what those are, but as we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to classify you as a human being, okay? So we're going to classify a human as we go, okay? So we're going to, every single plant, every single animal, okay, every living organism fits into the classification system. Now, why is this so important for us to learn as we look at science, we look at biology, and any particular science that we look at, is because we have to know where we're similar in each one of these, where we're similar in the kingdoms, okay? So the kingdom is really simple. We've got the plant kingdom, we've got the animal kingdom, and we also have something called the Monura kingdom, M-O-N-E-O-U-R, okay? It just sounded like manure, didn't it? But the Monura kingdom, and that's the bacteria and the protists. So when we look at this, here's what I'm going to do on your test, just so that you're not taking too many notes. What I want you to do in this class is I'm just introducing you the classification system. So on this test, I want you to know kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and I want you to know what the classification is for humans and those. So as we talk about other things, okay, realize we're not going to cover all the other plants and animals that are out there. So you're going to need to know the Linnaeus classification system and what the classification system is for humans, okay? So that being said, we're going to start on this adventure and we're going to learn about the classification of plants and animals based on the classification system. So kingdom, okay, once again we have the plants, we have the animals, we have the Monura kingdom, okay? So humans are in the animal kingdom, okay? Well, that's kind of nice. So right away we divide off, you know, what's the difference between a plant and an animal. Later on we'll talk about carbon dioxide and oxygen and which one gives off what, and which one breathes in, these different things. We'll talk about the difference between plant and animals, and we'll also talk about bacteria and protists and molds and all those kinds of good things. So then we're going to move on to the phylum, okay? So in the phylum, we break down the animal kingdom. We say, okay, well, there's lots of different animals out there, okay? So this is where we have the chordates and the non-chordates, okay? Well, chordate means that we have a backbone. You remember I was telling you earlier that other languages are poetic, okay? So ordinarily, in Latin, we would say the chordata, okay? So we would say the phylum chordata, and Linnaeus, okay, being a Latin, he liked the poetic language, but we have Americanized that to a chordate, okay? So phylum, okay, so humans, do we have a backbone? The only question that we ask for this in the animal kingdom is, do you have a backbone? If you are, you're a chordate. If you do not have a backbone, you're a non-chordate. So we are a chordate, okay? So that's our phylum. So when we say, what phylum are we in? Well, you can either say chordata or chordate, whichever one you want to do. So now what that means is that as of right now, we're the same of every animal with a backbone, okay? Does a giraffe have a backbone? Yes, it's a chordate. It's a chordate, or if you like to say chordata, you're welcome to do that too, okay? So then we go on to class. Well, there's lots of different classes, okay? As we have these, there's not a lot of different kingdoms, and there's different phylums. So in the plant, we have different phylums. We'll talk about those later too. All right. So in the class, okay, there's a lot of different classes. We are actually in the mammal. We are mammals. Okay. So M-A-M-M-A-L, mammal. That's our class. So then we have characteristics of a mammal. Okay. So the characteristics of a mammal is mammals have hair. Okay, instead of fur. Oh, that's interesting. That separates us off. Okay. The mammal also gives a live birth. We don't lay eggs. Okay. If we were a bird, our class would be aves, A-V-E-S, and we would have instead of hair, we would have feathers, and instead of live birth, we would lay eggs. Okay. So right away, as a mammal, we know that we have hair, we give live birth, and we also know that we have a constant body temperature. We have equilibrium of body temperature. Our body temperature is around 98.6. It fluctuates a little bit. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. But the class for humans is mammal. Okay. The order is primates. Okay. Primates. Now, primates are kind of interesting because this is where we begin to get to this, and this is where people go, oh, well, I think humans are in the same classification as monkeys. Well, you know, we are right here, but by the time we get down to the bottom, you'll see that humans are a completely different classification from monkeys. But as of right now, we look at this, and a monkey, yes, a monkey's an animal, a monkey's a chordate, a monkey's a mammal, and a monkey's a primate. But see, that's the problem is we need to classify this thing all the way down to species before we start making these crazy assumptions that man came from monkeys. Okay? And you will find that that never happened. All right? And here's what happens. This is where, when we talk about the classification system, and Linnaeus came up with this is where we realize that that didn't happen. And I'll show you that here in just a little bit. So what does a primate mean? Well, primate's really interesting because a primate has an opposing thumb. Okay? So that allows a primate to be able to pick things up and be able to do things that a non-primate doesn't have. The other thing a primate has is there's a certain part of the brain, okay? A certain part of the brain, it's not a totally reasoning part of the brain, but it's a part of a reactive part of the brain. It's a frontal lobe. And so do monkeys have that? Yeah. Do other primates have that? Yes. Okay. Did we come from monkeys? No. All right. So then we have what's called the family. Okay. Our family is Hominidae. Okay. Now that's one you might not have heard so much. Hominidae. Hominidae is the family that we're in. Okay. Let me do hominidae and then genus and species, and then talk to you about the difference between all of these. Okay. So our genus is Homo. Okay. Homo means that we walk upright. Isn't that interesting? It also has to do with our brain. Okay. And then our species name for a human being is sapien. Now this is really interesting because when we get to sapien, that's where our brain can do problem solving and do reasoning. And so when we look at the skull of a monkey and we look at the brain and people begin to look at some of the different things, we realize that we left off up here what a primate can do compared to what a Homo sapien can do is two different things. Okay? And there's also some differences that we found out. We're beginning to find out, and especially probably, I think this controversy of did man come from monkeys has fueled a lot more evidence. You know, I was talking to you earlier about how we've got to investigate and look at the new facts. So we're finding more and more things, and as we go with this, we realize that a human being definitely did not come from a monkey. However, there are some characteristics because, why are there some characteristics? Because as we go right here and we get done with this order, to this point we are the same, not the same identical, but the same classification system as a monkey. And an orangutan, okay, and a baboon, okay. Some of you are like, yeah, I think some of my friends and relatives stopped at the baboon stage, okay. So we have hominidae, which we begin to get some little more definite characteristics. We have Homo and we have sapien. Now, the scientific name for an organism, okay, the scientific name for the organism, okay, so let's make sure we have this. Scientific name, all right, is the genus and the species, okay? So it's the genus plus the species, all right? So what we do, okay, so the scientific name for us as a human, okay, our genus is Homo and species is is sapien, so we capitalize the first, so we are Homo, and then another word, sapien. Okay? So that's the scientific name for humans is Homo sapien. So every single animal, every single plant has a scientific name which takes us to the genus and the species. So what we do now is every time we talk about a human, we don't say kingdom animal, phylum Chordae, class mammal, order primate. Instead we just say humans are Homo sapiens. So as I say Homo sapien, then you know right away that all of these others carry over into that. So it's kind of cool. So when I mentioned aves a while ago for birds, we have the canines group. We have cats. We have all kinds of things in this different deal. So when we go to the genus and species, then what we're saying is we're using that scientific name, and that scientific name tells us all of the characteristics of that organism. So I want to just make sure that we've got this, okay? So once again, who did this? Linnaeus, okay? Linnaeus did the classification system. Okay, so you're kind of getting into this class, you're kind of learning, you know, the test is important, but I'm more interested in you really understanding science, okay? So Linnaeus came up with this classification system. Why is this important? Because we don't have to identify every single organism. We can just give the scientific name for that organism, and it defines all of the characteristics of that organism. It's really cool. So whenever we say we found a new species, somebody may say, I found a new species of plant. I was out, you know, somewhere in some jungle and found this new species of plant. It means that no other plant has all of the exact same characteristics. They're probably the same all the way through the genus, but they found something slightly different. Wow, kind of cool. So you can see where after all these years of man just being curious about his surroundings, to come up with a new species, that's kind of big. That's kind of big. And then we can see that some species die out and become extinct and no longer exist anymore. Wow, that's kind of interesting. And then we find through natural selection that some species had to adapt, and they might have made a new species because a particular species might have had these characteristics, but they might have had to adapt. So that being said, Linnaeus came up with this classification system. What is a classification system? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Okay, so we classified a human. Our kingdom is animal. Our phylum is Chordae, meaning that we have a backbone. Our class is mammals. Order is primates. Family is hominidae. Genus is Homo, and species is sapien. So what's a scientific name for us? Well, it's a genus plus a species, so it's Homo sapien. So there we go. We talked a little bit. This classification system is really important. We'll continue with that throughout the class, and a lot of times I will give you the genus and the species and refer back to the Linnaeus classification system. See you at the next video.